In 1981, two screenwriters sit across from a Disney executive who has just finished reading their script.
Bob and I said, well, let's go take it to Disney. So we set up a meeting and we go in, meet with an executive, and we sit down and he says, "Are you guys insane?"
He slides it back across the desk and asks them, point blank, if they have lost their minds.
"You've got this scene with the kid and his mom in the car. This is incest. We can't do this." So it was too extreme for Disney.
The mother is in the car with her son. The original ending detonates a nuclear bomb in the Nevada desert. A teenage boy climbs into a refrigerator to survive the blast. And that is only what made it onto the page. What got cut from Back to the Future before the cameras ever rolled is darker than anything you saw on screen. The room where it got rejected. Look, you have to understand something about the version of Back to the Future that almost happened. The movie you grew up with is one of the most beloved films in American history. It's the one your dad quoted at the dinner table. It's the one that sold more skateboards in 1985 than any actual skateboard company did. It's the one that turned a stainless steel sports car nobody wanted into one of the most recognizable objects on Earth. That movie almost didn't exist. The script was rejected more than 40 times, not by small studios, by every major studio in Hollywood. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale would walk into an office, hand over the pages, get the rejection, and walk back out into the parking lot to do it again. They got rejected so many times they started revisiting studios after the executives changed, hoping the new guys hadn't read it yet. The reasons varied. Some studios said time travel movies didn't make money. Some said the script was too sweet for a market that wanted raunchy teen comedies like Porky's. One executive at a major studio reportedly told the writers, almost word for word, that audiences in 1981 had no interest in watching a teenager bond with his parents, and that they should rewrite the entire script around a different genre. But the rejections that hit hardest were the ones that came back with the same uncomfortable note. Something about this script is wrong. Something about it is making people in the room nervous. By the time Zemeckis and Gale walked into Disney, they were running out of options. They figured the family-friendly studio would either save them or kill the project for good. The pitch meeting was set up through a contact at the company. Both writers prepared the same way they had prepared for the previous 39 rejections. They walked in, sat down, watched the executive read the pages, and waited. The executive read it, then he looked up at them. "Are you guys nuts? Are you insane? We can't make a movie like this. You've got the kid and the mother in his car. It's incest. This is Disney." That was the moment Bob Gale would tell decades later in interviews. The exact words. And here's the thing. The Disney executive wasn't wrong about what he was reading. He was just unwilling to greenlight it. Gale and Zemeckis walked out of that meeting with the same script that had failed everywhere else. No closer to a green light, with one more no, added to a pile that was already taller than either of them wanted to think about. The plot point. They couldn't say out loud. The piece of the script that made every studio executive shift uncomfortably in their chair was the central plot mechanic itself. Marty McFly travels back to 1955. He accidentally interferes with the moment his parents are supposed to fall in love. His mother, who is now a teenager the same age as Marty, meets him before she meets his father. She is attracted to him. In the finished movie, this is played as dramatic irony and comedic discomfort. Marty squirms. The audience laughs. The story pivots toward fixing the timeline and getting George and Lorraine back together. But in the original 1980 draft, that thread was significantly more aggressive than what made the final cut. Lorraine doesn't just have a passing crush on her future son, she actively pursues him. There is a scene in the car. There is a scene at the school dance. The script lingers on her advances in a way the released film carefully softens. Every studio that read the draft had the same reaction in two stages. First, they laughed. Then they stopped laughing and asked the writers if they were really planning to put this in a movie aimed at families. Zemeckis and Gale didn't see it as scandalous. They saw it as the engine of the story. The whole point of Back to the Future is that Marty has to undo the damage his presence creates, and the most powerful version of that damage is the one that makes him squirm hardest. They were writing comedy. The studios were reading something else. Disney shut the door. Columbia, which had originally given them a development deal, dropped the project entirely. The script sat in a drawer, and then came the part most people don't know about. Because before Steven Spielberg and Universal eventually picked it up, Zemeckis and Gale spent 4 years rewriting that script. And during those 4 years, the original ending of Back to the Future was something nobody alive in 1985 would have recognized: the nuclear blast finale. In the version of the script that floated through Hollywood for most of the early 1980s, there was no clock tower, there was no lightning bolt, there was no Doc Brown sliding down a cable in the rain, shouting at Marty to start the engine. Instead, there was a nuclear bomb. The original time machine wasn't a DeLorean. The DeLorean DMC-12 didn't even hit the road until 1981. And in the first draft, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale hadn't imagined any kind of car. The time machine was a refrigerator, a specific kind of refrigerator, lead-lined, mounted on the back of a truck, built to be transported into the Nevada desert and parked at the edge of an active atomic bomb test. The plan was this: Doc Brown, called Professor Brown in the early drafts, had built a time travel laser. The laser needed an enormous burst of energy to activate. The only energy source large enough on planet Earth was the detonation of a nuclear weapon. So in the climax, Marty would drive the refrigerator-mounted laser into the path of the blast, climb inside the fridge to survive the radiation, and ride the explosion home. Read that sentence again. A teenage boy locks himself inside a refrigerator at a nuclear test site and survives a bomb going off 10 feet away. If you're enjoying the deep cuts on this one, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. The studio cut darker material than this from the sequels too, and we're getting to it in a minute. That was the ending. That was the climax of what was supposed to be a family adventure movie. Zemeckis and Gale had even done research on it. They had looked into how filmmakers stage controlled detonations of small false towns the government used for atomic testing in the 1950s. They were planning to recreate one. The budget for that single sequence alone would have been catastrophic. Early production estimates put the cost of building the test site, dressing it, mounting the refrigerator on the truck, and staging the controlled blast at numbers most studios in 1981 would have refused to spend on any movie, let alone a sci-fi comedy from two writers nobody had heard of. And there was something else. The sequence had to be shot somewhere. Nevada was the obvious choice, since that's where the actual atomic tests had taken place in the 1950s and where the script was set. But the federal government still owned most of the relevant land. The production would have needed permits, insurance, cooperation from local authorities who, in the early 1980s, were not particularly enthusiastic about Hollywood crews recreating nuclear explosions inside their state borders. None of that was impossible. All of it was a nightmare. But the budget wasn't what killed it. The Spielberg veto. When Steven Spielberg finally signed on to executive produce, he read the script and stopped at the refrigerator. He didn't object to the bomb. He didn't object to the desert. He objected to one specific image: a kid climbing into a refrigerator. Spielberg was worried, and his exact concern was very practical, that children watching the movie would copy what they saw on screen. They would climb into refrigerators at home. The doors would seal. They would suffocate. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, child suffocation in old-style latching refrigerators was a real cultural fear. The federal government had passed the Refrigerator Safety Act in 1956, specifically because so many children had died playing inside discarded fridges. Parents in 1985 still remembered that. Spielberg wasn't being paranoid. He was reading the room. He killed the refrigerator. And by killing the refrigerator, he killed the entire ending. That decision is the only reason the DeLorean exists in cinematic history. Zemeckis and Gale had to rebuild the climax from scratch. They needed a new time machine, something mobile, something visual, something that didn't require a nuclear weapon. They landed on the gull-winged sports car nobody had been able to sell, attached a flux capacitor to the back of it, and let it be powered by lightning instead of a mushroom cloud. The funny part is what happened to the refrigerator. Spielberg held onto that image. He never let it go. More than 2 decades later, when he directed Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he opened the movie with Indy hiding inside a lid-lined refrigerator to survive a nuclear blast in the Nevada desert. It's the exact scene from the original Back to the Future script, the exact one he had vetoed. He'd just been waiting 23 years to use it. The deleted scene that never made it back. Now, we have to talk about what got cut from the sequels. Because if you thought the original ending was disturbing, the deleted material from Back to the Future, Part 2, goes somewhere the studio refused to follow. You remember the alternate 1985. Biff Tannen, rich beyond reason, has used the stolen sports almanac to bet his way into a casino empire. Hill Valley is a wasteland. Marty's mother is Biff's wife. The world has rotted around them. In the version that made it to theaters, we see Lorraine. We see Marty's sister, Linda. We do not, anywhere, see Marty's older brother, Dave. The original Back to the Future established Dave as a young white-collar professional, working a respectable job, dressed in a suit and tie at the family dinner table. He simply doesn't appear in the sequel. He was supposed to. There is a deleted scene from Back to the Future Part 2 in which Marty, walking through the wreckage of alternate 1985, runs into his older brother on the street. Dave is no longer a clean-cut office worker. He's a homeless alcoholic. He's broken. Biff's marriage to Lorraine has destroyed the entire family from the inside, and Dave has been the one who absorbed the worst of it. Marty tries to help him. Dave doesn't recognize him. He stumbles away into the alternate Hill Valley and is never seen again. Mark McClure, the actor who played Dave, actually filmed the scene. He showed up. He shot the footage. The studio paid him. And then they cut it. Why? Because the test audiences couldn't handle it. Back to the Future, as a franchise, lives on the edge of a tonal cliff. The movies are comedies. They're adventures. They're meant to send the audience home feeling good. The moment you introduce an alcoholic brother begging in the street, the movie stops being fun. You're not on an adventure anymore. You're watching what happens to a family when one decision goes wrong and the ripple effects shatter the people you love. The studio decided that crossing that line would break the franchise. So, the footage went into a vault. McClure's name stayed in the cast list, but Dave McFly, as a fully realized character in the sequel, simply ceased to exist. The third movie's murdered lawmen. If you think they pulled back for Part 3, they didn't. They cut something arguably worse. Back to the Future. Part 3 takes Marty and Doc to 1885. The villain is Buford Mad Dog Tannen, the great-grandfather of Biff, an outlaw with a hair-trigger temper and no impulse control. The Hill Valley of the Old West is run, just barely, by the town's law enforcement, including a marshal played by James Tolkan. You know Tolkan from the earlier films as Strickland, the bald, intense school principal. In the third movie, he plays Strickland's ancestor. In the version of the film you saw in theaters, Marshal Strickland is a side character. He's stern, he's competent, he survives. In the original cut, he didn't. There is a deleted scene from Back to the Future Part 3 in which Buford Tannen shoots Marshal Strickland dead in the middle of the street, in front of his young son. The boy watches his father die. Buford rides off. The scene is staged as a deliberate establishing moment for Buford as a true threat, the kind of villain who can casually destroy a child's life and ride away laughing. It was filmed, it was edited, it was put into early cuts of the movie. Then the studio pulled it. The reason was the same as the Dave McFly scene. Test audiences felt the floor drop out from under them. A child watching his father get shot is the kind of image that doesn't sit comfortably inside a popcorn movie about cowboys and time machines. It works in a different kind of film, a grittier one, a more honest one about violence and consequence. But Back to. The Future was never trying to be that movie. The studio understood that the moment the lawman dies in front of his son, the trilogy stops being a trilogy and becomes something else. So, they cut it. But here's the thing. Both deleted scenes still exist. The Dave McFly footage, the Strickland murder footage, they're real. They're sitting in archives. Fans have seen fragments. The Back to the Future, Part 2 novelization, written by Craig Shaw Gardner and published as a tie-in, actually reinstates the Dave scene as part of the canonical story. Read the book, and you read what the movie refused to show you. The Asylum Timeline. There's one more piece of the deleted material that gets discussed less, and it might be the strangest of all. In the alternate 1985 timeline of Back to the Future Part 2, Doc Brown is missing. In the released version, Marty finds out that Doc has been committed to an insane asylum. Doc shows Marty a newspaper clipping. There's a small photograph of Emmett Brown in a straitjacket. The headline confirms he's been declared legally insane. The scene moves on quickly. That newspaper clipping is the surviving trace of a much longer storyline that almost made it into the film. In an earlier version of the script, the alternate timeline didn't just briefly mention Doc being institutionalized, it explored it. There were scenes set inside the asylum. There was a sequence where Marty had to break in and physically extract Doc from the facility. There was a darker subplot involving the people running the institution and what they had done to him. It was a full storyline about how, in a world where Biff Tannen had unlimited money and political influence, anyone who threatened the New Order could simply be locked away and forgotten. The newspaper clipping made it into the final film. The asylum scenes did not. Director Robert Zemeckis felt the sequence pulled the energy of the second act in a direction the movie couldn't recover from. The audience needed to be in motion, chasing the almanac, racing the clock. They couldn't afford to sit inside the walls of a mental institution, watching the consequences of what Biff had built. So, the asylum got compressed into a single newspaper clipping, 2 seconds of screen time, a photograph in a straitjacket. That's the only thing left of what was supposed to be one of the most disturbing sequences in the entire trilogy. Why the studio kept cutting. Step back for a moment. Look at the pattern. A nuclear bomb climax. A teenage boy locked inside a refrigerator. A mother-son storyline that made executives squirm. An alcoholic brother in alternate 1985. A lawman shot dead in front of his child. A mental institution storyline that almost made it into the second film. Every one of these elements was written. Most of them were filmed. None of them survived. And there's a reason for that. And it isn't censorship. It isn't cowardice. It's a very specific creative philosophy that Zemeckis, Gale, and the studios behind them came to share over the 4 years it took to get the first movie made. Back to the Future is a movie about consequence. The entire franchise is built on the idea that small actions ripple outward and reshape everything. But the studios, and eventually Zemeckis himself, realized that there was a tonal limit to how dark you could make those consequences before the audience stopped having fun watching them. A mother attracted to her son? You can dance on the edge of that for comedy. A nuclear bomb climax? You can flirt with it in the script, but you can't actually put it on screen in a movie selling skateboards and toy DeLoreans. An alcoholic brother begging in the street? That's a different movie. A child watching his father die? That's a different genre entirely. Every time the franchise reached one of those edges, the studio pulled it back. Sometimes Zemeckis pulled it back himself. The result is a trilogy that feels light, fun, and rewatchable for 40 years running, while the darker shadow version of the same story sits in archived footage that almost nobody has seen. You watch the version they let you see. There's another version of Back to the Future that nobody alive in 1985 was ready for. The footage that still exists, most of the deleted material from the trilogy survives in some form. The Dave McFly scene from Part 2 has circulated. The Strickland death scene from Part 3 has been described in detail by people who worked on the film, and shown in fragments in behind-the-scenes documentaries. The Asylum subplot exists in early draft scripts that have leaked into archives and fan databases over the years. The original 1980 nuclear refrigerator ending exists too. The first draft of the screenplay is available to researchers. You can read it. The structure is recognizable. The characters are mostly the same. Marty is there, Doc is there, called Professor Brown. The mother plot point is there in its earliest, rawest form. The refrigerator is there, on the back of a truck, parked at the edge of a Nevada test range. And the chimpanzee is there too. That's right. In the original draft, Doc Brown didn't have a dog named Einstein. He had a pet chimpanzee named Shemp. That part also got cut, somewhere along the way, when test readers pointed out that a scientist with a pet monkey reminded them too much of the kind of cartoon character the script was trying not to be. Marty's girlfriend in the original draft wasn't Jennifer. She was Susie Parker. Marty himself wasn't a high school musician. He was a street-level video pirate running a black market bootleg operation alongside Doc Brown. The studio specifically rejected that version too, because they refused to make a movie where the hero was a criminal. Every single beat of Back to the Future that became iconic, the DeLorean, the lightning strike, the clock tower, Einstein the dog, Marty's band, the Twin Pines Mall, was the result of cutting something darker, weirder, or more uncomfortable that came before. What's left is the version the audience could love. What got cut is the version the audience would have walked out of. what this really means. Back to the Future, the movie you grew up loving, is a film that survived a 4-year argument between 2 writers and an entire industry about how dark a family adventure was allowed to get. Every executive who said no, every test audience that flinched, every editor who pulled a scene out of the cut, was part of the process that produced the version of the story you actually saw. That doesn't make Zemeckis and Gale wrong. It doesn't make the studios right. It makes the movie something stranger than the artifact most people think it is. It makes Back to the Future a film that exists because of what it isn't, more than because of what it is. The mother plot point survived in a softened form. The nuclear bomb did not. The alcoholic brother was filmed and buried. The murdered lawman was filmed and buried. The asylum subplot was compressed into 2 seconds of screen time. The refrigerator became a DeLorean. The chimpanzee became a dog. The video pirate became a high school musician with a guitar. 40 years of pop culture history rests on top of those cuts. The skateboards, the hoverboards, the merchandise, the sequels, the animated series, the Telltale game, the Broadway musical, the endless quotes. All of it sits on a foundation of decisions to walk away from the darker version of the story. Every piece of merchandise sold, every replica DeLorean built in a fan's garage, every kid who taught themselves to skateboard because of that one tracking shot down a Hill Valley street exists because the people in the room said no to the version of the movie that would have made all of that impossible. And the darker version still exists. In the drafts, in the deleted scenes, in the archive footage, in Bob Gale's interviews when he tells the Disney story with the same cadence 40 years later, the executive's exact words still hanging in the air. Are you guys nuts? This is Disney. The next time you watch Back to the Future, watch the moment Lorraine first meets Marty. Watch how she looks at him. Watch the scene in the car. Watch the dance. The entire structure of those scenes is the softened, 9th draft version of something the original script was much louder about. Every laugh you have is the laugh the studio allowed you to have. The original storyline was too disturbing for Disney, too risky for Columbia, too uncomfortable for 40 other studios, and ultimately too tonally dangerous for the version of the film that made it to theaters. What you see on screen is what passed inspection. What got cut is the version that almost was. So here's the question we want to leave you with. If the original Back to the Future had been made the way Zemeckis and Gale first wrote it, the nuclear ending, the refrigerator, the longer mother storyline, the alcoholic, brother, the murdered marshal, the asylum, would it still be the movie we grew up loving? Or would it have disappeared, the way most darker first drafts do, into the archive shelf where studios put the things they couldn't bring themselves to release? Drop your take in the comments below. Tell us which deleted moment you most want to see restored, and whether you think the studio was right to cut it from the final theatrical release. The original cuts are still out there. The shadow version of Back to the Future is real. It just isn't the one you remember.